Hi, I'm Cameron Sauers here for the Civil War Institute at the Abraham Bryan farm at the Gettysburg battlefield to talk a little bit about Abraham Bryan and the African American experience here on the Gettysburg battlefield. Abraham Bryan was born the son of slave parents in Maryland in 1807. The first time he appears on the Gettysburg census is in the year 1840. Now, it's difficult for historians to track down the paper trail of Abraham Bryan's life because Bryan was illiterate. When he signed documents, it was only with a simple X. But we do know by 1857, Bryan had purchased the property that's here behind me. By 1860, him and his wife Elizabeth, their two children, Francis and William, called that building home. By 1863, they had this barn that sheltered horses, cows, mules, and pigs. Bryan also at the same time owns a property with James Warfield, a free African-American man on the ridgeline south of town. They were essentially neighbors. Bryan's accomplishments are nothing short of remarkable for a free black man in 1860s America. His success was sharply contrasted with what lies just south of us. Here, if you follow the Catoctin mountain range down to the community of Emmitsburg, Maryland, where in 1860, as Bryan is buying and establishing a homestead, there's 47 enslaved human beings ranging from age 70 to newborn. The slaves of Emmitsburg, Maryland, represent just a small portion of the 87,000 enslaved human beings in Maryland on the eve of the Civil War. The view from Bryan's front yard is one of striking contrasts, where freedom and enslavement existed side by side. Many of the people who live on this ridgeline south of Gettysburg before the battle are African Americans. Here was their homes, their properties, the land they work, and the land they traveled on every day. But by the time of the battle on the 1st of July, these African Americans had all fled Gettysburg because of the approaching threat that Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia posed. We don't know when Bryan left. We don't know where he went, but we do know why. Every African American in the path of Southern invaders, every man, every woman, every young girl, and every young boy was susceptible to capture and to be sold into slavery. Whether they had been free or whether they had been born enslaved, their freedom was at risk. Freedom would not be guaranteed for African Americans until ultimate Union victory, but that was more than 2 years away. But as Bryan and African Americans flee Gettysburg, more than 6,000 arrive with Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia serving as camp slaves, where they do everything from serve as cooks, butchers, blacksmiths, and hospital attendants, or attending officers as their camp slaves. These men performed a wide range of activities for their owners. When Lee's army retreats from Pennsylvania back into Virginia, these camp slaves are going to be integral into the Army of Northern Virginia's ability to maintain its wagon train as they head back into the South. During the battle, Bryan's property is going to play a key role. His home becomes the headquarters of Alexander Hayes' division of the 2nd Corps. And on July 3rd, Thomas Smith's Union Brigade is going to be posted behind this stone wall as they repulse Johnson Pettigrew's assault. The high watermark of the Confederacy is the Pettigrew Pickett's Charge, which happened on the land of a free black man. It's one of the great ironies of this grand Confederate assault that's become an important part of the stories we tell at Gettysburg, that it happens partially on the land of a free black man, one of the most successful in the area. Bryan's home was riddled with shot and shell during the battle, more so perhaps than any structure in Gettysburg. His house was stripped of its siding and beaten by the bullets and shells of Pickett's charge. Not only that, Bryan's crops were destroyed, his animals were taken, his orchard destroyed, and a tenant property that he owned along the Emmitsburg Road also, all but destroyed. According to the 1864 Elliott map, which charts the destruction of Gettysburg, most notably where graves were still left on the battlefield, the Bryan property had more than 100 graves on it. When Bryan returns to Gettysburg after the battle, he will hire himself out for the price of $1 for every body returned just over there to Soldiers National Cemetery. Now, the end of the Civil War would guarantee Bryan and his family their freedom, but it would not secure their financial position. The destruction of so much of their property left the family on very difficult grounds. In his damage claim submitted to the federal government after the war, Bryan estimated the damages to his property at more than $1,000. The only compensation he received was $15 from the quartermaster department for hay that was taken from the barn. Bryan does his best to rebuild, but because of his advancing age and the enormous size of the task in front of him, he sold off the property in 1868. He returned to the town and worked as a hostler in one of the town's hotels. He died in May of 1879 and is buried in what is now called Lincoln Cemetery, originally the Sons of Goodwill Cemetery, where Black Gettysburgians of the 19th century were buried, including veterans of the Battle of Olustee and other notable Civil War engagements. But it's on Bryan's property in 1938 where one of the most iconic images of the Civil War era is going to happen. It's the iconic photos of Union and Confederate veterans reconciling the causes and the factors at stake in the war by shaking hands over the stone wall and seemingly healing up the nation's wounds. But in the background of that photo, you will see Bryan's barn and you will see Bryan's house. A free African American man's property is where the wounds of war were bound up by Union and Confederate veterans. It's a part of the narrative where African Americans have been removed from the stories that we relate on this battlefield. Bryan's barn reminds us of one of the great paradoxes of the American Civil War. Gettysburg, one of the defining battles in the great struggle for freedom, is also the site where the causes and factors of war were seemingly covered up by Union and Confederate veterans. African Americans have never had an easy time in Gettysburg. In 1950, approaching the centennial of the Civil War, none of the 36 hotels and boarding houses would rent rooms to African Americans, and only 3 of the 14 restaurants in the town of Gettysburg would serve them meals. And the Bryan farm shows us antebellum era, the Civil War era, Reconstruction, and modern Civil War memory. It complicates our understanding of the Battle of Gettysburg and shows us the many layers of stories that we can and should tell on this battlefield. Thank you.